The communication array on the Zeltharian mining station Koratha's Edge hummed with nervous energy as Communications Officer Vextal stared at the incoming transmission with all four of his eye stalks. The message had been bouncing through hyperspace relay stations for 3 standard cycles, growing more garbled with each jump, but the core meaning remained terrifyingly clear. "Sir," Vextal's voice cracked like breaking crystal as he addressed Station Commander Rolf. "The Drakmori hegemony, they're demanding our surrender within 2 solar rotations." Commander Rolf's blue-scaled hide rippled with stress patterns as he reviewed the tactical display. The Drakmori weren't known for empty threats. Their reputation for enslaving entire species and strip mining their worlds had made them the boogeyman of this entire galactic arm. Worse yet, intelligence reports suggested they had been building up their fleet strength for months, conquering system after system in a relentless march toward the resource-rich Zeltharian colonies. "How many ships?" Rolf asked, though he dreaded the answer. Long-range sensors detected at least 47 Drakmori warships moving through the Kepler 442 system, reported Tactical Officer Zinn, her feathers molting from stress. "Their flagship Death's Embrace is among them." Rolf felt his heart sink. Death's Embrace was a kilometer-long dreadnought that had personally overseen the destruction of the peaceful Mindorian civilization just 6 months ago. Against such overwhelming force, their small mining station with its modest defensive grid would last perhaps 30 minutes. "Sir," Vextal interrupted hesitantly, "there might be one option. My cousin Drell works on a diplomatic vessel near the galactic core. He mentioned encountering a new species recently, one that apparently has unusual military capabilities." "Unusual how?" Rolf demanded. "They call themselves humans. According to Drell, they responded to a simple trade dispute by sending what they called a peacekeeping force of over 200 ships. The dispute was resolved very quickly after that." Rolf's tactical mind began working. "Do we have any way to contact them?" "The diplomatic channels are still open through the Galactic Council's emergency network," Vextal replied. "But, sir, the translation protocols are still primitive for their language. The message might not convey the proper urgency or context." At this point, Vextal, any help is better than no help. Draft a message requesting immediate military assistance. Make it clear we're facing extinction. 3 hours later, Communications Officer Sarah Chin aboard the human diplomatic vessel UES Harmony was enjoying her morning coffee when her console lit up with an incoming priority transmission. The automated translation systems had been working overtime lately as humanity made contact with dozens of new alien species, but this message seemed different. "Captain Rodriguez," she called across the bridge, "we've got what appears to be a distress call from a mining station in the, let me check the star charts, Zeltharian system. They're requesting immediate military assistance against something called the Drakmori hegemony." Captain Maria Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. The Harmony was an exploration and diplomatic vessel, not a warship. "What's their situation?" According to the translation software, they're facing imminent invasion by a force of 47 enemy warships. The message says they have minimal defensive capabilities and are requesting any available military support. Rodriguez pulled up the tactical display showing their current position. They were only 2 FTL jumps away from the Zeltharian system, well within the range of human-controlled space. More importantly, this would be humanity's first real chance to demonstrate their commitment to protecting their new alien neighbors. "Send a reply confirming we received their message and that assistance is en route," Rodriguez ordered. "Then, get me Admiral Harrison on priority channels." What Captain Rodriguez didn't realize was that her message would trigger the largest mobilization of human military assets since the end of the Centauri War. Admiral James Harrison was reviewing fleet deployment schedules in his office on Luna Station when the priority alert came through. The message was brief but clear: alien allies under attack, requesting immediate military assistance, estimated enemy force of 47 warships. 47 ships, Harrison muttered to himself. The humans had learned hard lessons during their expansion into space about the importance of overwhelming force when protecting allies. Better safe than sorry. He activated his command console and began issuing orders. "This is Admiral Harrison. Authorize Operation Guardian Shield. I want the 3rd, 5th, and 7th fleets mobilized within 4 hours. This is not a drill." Across human space, the response was immediate and thunderous. On Mars, the orbital shipyards began launching vessels that had been in final preparation phases. The asteroid belt mining stations redirected their cargo haulers to emergency supply runs. From Earth to the Outer Rim colonies, humanity's military machine shifted into high gear. Meanwhile, on Koritha's edge, the Zeltharians waited with growing desperation. Long-range sensors showed the Drakmori fleet advancing steadily, their massive ships cutting through space like predators closing in on wounded prey. Any response from these humans? Commander Rolf asked for the dozenth time. They confirmed receipt of our message and said assistance was en route, Vextal reported. But, sir, even if they send their fastest ships, basic physics suggests they can't possibly arrive before the Drakmori. Rolf nodded grimly. He had already begun drafting surrender terms, hoping to save at least some of his crew's lives. The station's defensive batteries were being charged to full capacity, but everyone knew it was a futile gesture. Then, 18 hours later, space began to ripple. The first sign was the gravitational distortions picked up by the station's sensors. Then came the flash of Alcubierre drives disengaging, one after another after another. Vextal's eye stalks nearly fell out as his sensors registered the first wave of arriving ships. Sir, he whispered, his voice barely audible, I'm reading multiple FTL emergence signatures. How many? Rolf asked, though he could tell from his communications officer's expression that the number was significant. 12, no, 18, 24. Vextal's voice climbed in pitch as more ships continued to arrive. Sir, I'm now reading over 60 ships and they're still arriving. On the bridge of the UES Leviathan, Admiral Harrison watched his fleet emerge from FTL with professional satisfaction. The human response had been impressive even by their own standards. 3 full battle fleets, supported by logistics vessels, medical ships, and even a few colony ships that had volunteered to help with potential evacuation efforts. Admiral, reported his tactical officer, all ships have successfully emerged from FTL. Total count, 187 vessels, including 43 heavy cruisers, 22 battleships, and 12 dreadnoughts. Harrison nodded approvingly. Signal the Zeltharian station. Let them know the cavalry has arrived. On Koritha's edge, the communications array was practically screaming with incoming signals. Vextal's translation software was struggling to keep up with the flood of data, but one message came through clearly: Zeltharian Mining Station, this is Admiral Harrison of the United Earth Space Command. We received your distress call. Consider your problem solved. Commander Rolf stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Where moments before there had been empty space, now floated the largest concentration of military vessels he had ever seen. The human ships were sleek and predatory-looking, bristling with weapon arrays and defensive systems that his sensors could barely categorize. Communications, he croaked, respond to the human admiral. Express our gratitude, and provide them with intelligence on the approaching Drakmori fleet. As the data was transmitted, Rolf couldn't help but wonder what kind of species could mobilize such a massive force in response to a single distress call from aliens they had barely met. The humans had turned what should have been a slaughter into something very different. Admiral Harrison reviewed the intelligence data with interest. 47 Drakmori ships was actually a smaller force than he had expected, given the urgency of the distress call. Still, it would provide an excellent opportunity to demonstrate human military capabilities to their new galactic neighbors. Tactical, deploy the fleet in a standard defensive formation around the mining station, he ordered. And send a message to the approaching Drakmori fleet on all frequencies. The message was simple and direct: attention Drakmori vessels. You are approaching a mining station under the protection of the United Earth Space Command. Reverse course immediately or face the consequences. Aboard the Drakmori flagship Death's Embrace, War Master Crothall initially assumed the message was some kind of elaborate joke. His intelligence network had never heard of this United Earth Space Command, and the idea that some unknown species would dare challenge the mighty Drakmori hegemony was laughable. Ignore the transmission, he ordered his bridge crew. These insects will learn the price of interfering with Drakmori expansion. But, as his fleet emerged from FTL at the edge of the system, Crothall's confidence evaporated like water in vacuum. His sensors showed not the helpless mining station he expected, but a massive fleet of unknown warships arranged in perfect defensive formation. How many ships? He demanded. 187 confirmed contacts, his sensor operator reported, his voice shaking. Multiple dreadnought-class vessels detected. Sir, their technology appears to be extremely advanced. Crothall had built his reputation on knowing when to fight and when to retreat. Staring at a fleet nearly 4 times the size of his own, composed of ships whose capabilities were completely unknown, the choice was obvious. All ships, emergency retreat. Activate FTL drives immediately. But Admiral Harrison had been expecting this reaction. All ships, implement FTL interdiction protocol. Don't let a single Drakmori vessel escape. Across the human fleet, specialized jammers activated, creating a field that made FTL travel impossible within the system. The Drakmori found themselves trapped, facing an enemy that had anticipated their every move. "This is your final warning," Harrison broadcasted. "Surrender immediately or we will open fire." The silence that followed was broken only by the surrender signals from every single Drakmori vessel. As Commander Rolf watched the impossible scene unfold on his tactical display, he realized that the galaxy had just changed forever. Humanity had announced their presence not with words, but with the overwhelming force of 187 warships responding to a desperate plea for help. The Zeltharians had asked for assistance and received an armada. The question now was what the humans planned to do with their newfound reputation as the species you definitely didn't want to make angry. War Master Krothal had never experienced defeat, let alone surrender. In his 30 cycles of commanding Drakmori fleets, he had reduced 17 civilizations to ash and claimed 43 systems for the hegemony. Now he found himself standing in the detention bay of a human vessel called the UES Leviathan, trying to comprehend how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. The human admiral who had captured his entire fleet was surprisingly small by galactic standards, barely reaching Krothal's shoulder despite the War Master's own modest height. Admiral Harrison's demeanor was calm and professional, lacking the savage triumph that Krothal expected from victorious conquerors. "Your ships and crews are intact," Admiral Harrison said through the translation device. "Nobody needs to die today. But we need to discuss the future of Drakmori expansion in this sector." Krothal's mandibles clicked with confusion. "You speak of mercy? Your kind has demonstrated overwhelming military superiority. Why not simply destroy us and claim our territory as is the right of conquest?" Harrison paused, considering his words carefully. The response he gave would likely be transmitted across the galaxy within days, setting the tone for humanity's relationship with dozens of alien species. "Because that's not who we are," Harrison replied. "Humans believe that military strength should be used to protect, not to conquer. Your people made the mistake of threatening innocents. We corrected that mistake. Now we need to ensure it doesn't happen again." Meanwhile, on Koritha's edge, Commander Rolf was struggling with his own disbelief as human marines escorted him through the corridors of one of their smaller vessels. The humans had insisted on a full debriefing, but what struck Rolf most was the casual efficiency with which they operated. The human ship's interior was clean and functional, with crew members moving purposefully through corridors lined with equipment that Rolf's sensors suggested was centuries ahead of anything in Zeltharian technology. Yet despite their obvious technological superiority, the humans treated him and his crew with genuine respect. "Commander Rolf," said Captain Torres, the human officer assigned to his debriefing, "we've analyzed your station's defensive capabilities. With respect, you are essentially defenseless against the Drakmori force." Rolf's scales shifted to embarrassed blue. "Our people are miners and traitors, Captain. We never expected to face military threats of this magnitude." "No criticism intended," Torres assured him. "But this raises important questions about regional security. According to our preliminary scans, there are 18 other mining operations and 3 civilian colonies within a 50 light-year radius. If the Drakmori were targeting you, they're likely planning similar attacks elsewhere." The implications hit Rolf like a plasma bolt. The Drakmori hadn't just been targeting Koritha's edge, they had been beginning a systematic conquest of the entire region. Without human intervention, millions of civilians would have faced enslavement or death. Back aboard the Leviathan, Admiral Harrison was receiving reports from across his fleet that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Intelligence gathered from the captured Drakmori vessels revealed the scope of their planned expansion. "Admiral," reported Intelligence Officer Commander Park, "the Drakmori had identified 47 star systems for immediate conquest, with an additional 136 systems marked for future expansion. Their target list includes 12 different species, most of whom appear to have minimal defensive capabilities." Harrison studied the holographic star map with growing concern. The Drakmori hadn't been launching a random raid, they had been implementing a systematic campaign of galactic conquest that would have enslaved billions of sentient beings.
What's their current fleet strength? Harrison asked.
According to the data we've extracted, this force represents approximately 60% of their total military assets. The remaining 40% is scattered across their existing territory, maintaining control over previously conquered systems.
Harrison nodded grimly.
The humans had stopped one attack, but the larger threat remained. More importantly, word of this incident would spread throughout the galaxy, potentially triggering larger conflicts as other species realized the scope of Drakmori ambitions. His communication officer interrupted his thoughts.
Admiral, we're receiving multiple incoming transmissions.
It appears word of our intervention has reached the Galactic Council. The Galactic Council was humanity's first formal contact with interstellar civilization, a loose organization of species that maintained trade relationships and attempted to mediate disputes. Harrison had been hoping to avoid their attention until humanity had established stronger relationships with individual species, but apparently that luxury was no longer available.
Put the transmission through, Harrison ordered.
The holographic display shimmered and resolved into the image of Counselor Vralketh, a dignified reptilian being who served as the Council's current rotating president. Behind him, Harrison could see the circular chamber where representatives of dozens of species gathered to debate galactic affairs.
Admiral Harrison, Vralketh's translated voice carried obvious concern. The Council has received preliminary reports regarding a major military engagement in the Zeltharian system. Can you confirm that human forces have captured an entire Drakmori fleet?
That's correct, Counselor.
47 Drakmori vessels surrendered after we responded to a distress call from a Zeltharian mining station.
Murmurs erupted from the Council chamber. Several species had been dealing with Drakmori expansion for years, losing territory and population to their relentless advance. The idea that someone had not only stopped a Drakmori fleet but captured it intact was unprecedented. Admiral, spoke a new voice as Representative Zindar of the Avian Collective stepped forward. Our intelligence suggests that the force you defeated represented a significant portion of Drakmori military strength.
How many ships did humanity deploy to achieve this victory? Harrison hesitated.
The honest answer might create more problems than it solved, but deception would be discovered eventually and would undermine human credibility. 187 vessels responded to the distress call, he replied. The silence in the Council chamber was deafening. Then, Representative Morthak of the Silicon-based consciousness spoke in his mechanically translated voice. Admiral, did you say that your species mobilized nearly 200 warships in response to a single distress call from a species you have minimal contact with?
That's correct. And how long did this mobilization require? Approximately 18 hours from initial contact to fleet arrival. More murmurs, these tinged with what the translation software identified as amazement and concern.
Harrison began to realize that humanity's response, which had seemed reasonable from a human perspective, appeared overwhelming to species who were accustomed to much smaller military forces and slower response times. Representative Keltar of the Aquatic Consortium raised a tentacle to speak.
Admiral, the Galactic Council has been attempting to organize a response to Drakmori expansion for over 2 standard years.
Our combined fleets have never been able to field more than 30 vessels for any single operation, and coordinating such a response typically requires months of negotiation. The humans appear to have solved this problem rather definitively, observed Vralketh dryly.
Admiral Harrison was beginning to understand that humanity had inadvertently announced their arrival on the galactic stage in the most dramatic way possible. Every species in the Council now knew that humans could rapidly deploy massive military forces in response to threats against their allies. Counselor, Harrison said carefully, humanity's response was motivated by our commitment to protecting innocent civilians from unprovoked aggression.
We have no territorial ambitions in this region. Nevertheless, Vralketh replied, your intervention has created a new reality that the Council must address.
The Drakmori threat has been a destabilizing force in this galactic arm for decades.
If humanity has the capability to neutralize that threat. The implication hung in the air like a gravitational anomaly. The Council wasn't just acknowledging humanity's military power, they were considering the possibility that humans might solve a problem that had plagued galactic civilization for generations. Back on the captured Drakmori flagship, War Master Crothall was having his own revelation as he reviewed the human fleet composition. The humans hadn't just brought overwhelming numbers, they had brought overwhelming technological superiority. Their ship's energy signatures suggested power generation capabilities that exceeded anything in Drakmori archives, and their weapons systems operated on principles that his engineers couldn't identify. Warmaster, his chief engineer, reported through the communication system, the human vessels are using some form of exotic matter for both propulsion and defensive systems. Our sensors can't penetrate their hull plating, and their energy weapons appear to be based on directed gravitational manipulation. Crothall felt something he had never experienced before, genuine fear of another species' capabilities. The humans hadn't just defeated his fleet, they had demonstrated that Drakmori technology was primitively obsolete in comparison. On the Leviathan, Admiral Harrison was reaching similar conclusions about the broader galactic situation. Humanity's technological advantages weren't just significant, they were overwhelming. The gap between human capabilities and those of other known species was so large that it fundamentally altered the balance of power in this entire region of space. Admiral, reported his science officer, preliminary analysis of the Drakmori vessels confirms our earlier assessments. Their technology is roughly equivalent to humanity's capabilities during the late colonial war period. We're looking at least a century of technological advancement advantage. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. This presented both opportunities and dangers. Humanity could easily become the dominant force in this galactic arm, but such dominance came with responsibilities that Earth's government might not be prepared to handle. His contemplation was interrupted by another priority transmission. This time, the signal was coming from Earth itself. Admiral Harrison, came the voice of Admiral Chen, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We've been monitoring your situation through the diplomatic channels. Washington wants to know, exactly how big is this mess you've stepped into? Harrison looked at the tactical display showing his fleet, the captured Drakmori vessels, the grateful Zeltharian station, and the communication links to dozens of alien governments who were all suddenly very interested in humanity's intentions. Sir, he replied, I believe we've accidentally become a galactic superpower. The transmission delay meant it would be several minutes before Earth could respond, but Harrison suspected that Washington was about to have the most interesting policy debate in human history. Humanity had come to the galactic community as explorers and traders. Through a simple act of compassion, they had revealed themselves as the most powerful military force in the region. As Admiral Harrison watched alien ships beginning to arrive from across the galaxy to witness the aftermath of the battle, he realized that humanity's quiet introduction to galactic civilization was officially over. The question now was whether Earth was ready for the responsibilities that came with the power they had accidentally displayed. The emergency session of Earth's Global Security Council convened in Geneva exactly 36 hours after Admiral Harrison's fleet had captured the Drakmori Armada. Representatives from every major nation sat around the circular table, their faces reflecting varying degrees of amazement, concern, and barely contained panic as they reviewed the intelligence report streaming in from the Zeltharian system. Secretary General Maria Santos opened the session with characteristic directness. Ladies and gentlemen, we appear to have accidentally become the dominant military power in our local galactic region. The question before us is, what do we do about it? Defense Minister Chen Weilin of the Pacific Alliance leaned forward, studying the holographic display that showed the positions of known alien civilizations. The immediate tactical situation is clear. Our forces have demonstrated overwhelming superiority against what was apparently one of the most feared military forces in this galactic arm. But the strategic implications are staggering, completed Foreign Minister Elena Kowalski of the European Federation. We've received preliminary diplomatic contact from 18 different alien governments in the past day alone. Half are asking for protection against various threats, and the other half are trying to determine whether we represent an existential threat to galactic stability. President Jackson of the North American Union rubbed his temples as he reviewed the latest reports. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Admiral Harrison deployed 3 battle fleets in response to what he thought was a routine distress call. This force turned out to be larger than anything the local aliens had ever seen, and technologically superior to anything they can produce. Now every alien government within 200 light-years is reconsidering their strategic assumptions. That's essentially correct, confirmed Admiral Chen via secure connection from Fleet Command. What we considered a proportional response to a humanitarian crisis appears to have been interpreted as a demonstration of overwhelming force projection capabilities. Meanwhile, in the Zeltharian system, the situation was becoming increasingly complex as alien vessels from across the region arrived to witness the aftermath of the battle. Commander Rolf found himself serving as an impromptu interpreter between the humans and a growing collection of alien representatives, each with their own agenda. The bridge of the human vessel UES Harmony had become an informal diplomatic center, with Captain Rodriguez attempting to manage conversations with 7 different species simultaneously. The translation computers were working overtime, and Rodriguez was beginning to understand why the diplomatic corps typically handled these situations.
"Captain," reported Communications Officer Chen, "we've got the Avian Collective requesting a formal audience with Admiral Harrison. The Silicon Consciousness wants to establish trade relations.
And the Aquatic Consortium is asking whether we're accepting new members for something they're calling a mutual defense arrangement." Before Rodriguez could respond, Tactical Officer Kumar interrupted with urgent news. "Captain, long-range sensors are detecting multiple fleet movements throughout the region. It appears that several alien governments are mobilizing their military forces."
The tactical display updated to show the positions of various alien fleets.
Most appeared to be moving toward the Zeltharian system, but a few were taking positions that suggested they were preparing for potential conflict.
Admiral Harrison studied the same data aboard the Leviathan with growing concern.
"It looks like our little demonstration has triggered a galactic realignment," he observed to his staff. "Everyone's trying to figure out where they stand in relation to humanity's new position." Intelligence Officer Commander Park highlighted several fleet movements on the holographic display.
"Admiral, the Crystalline Empire appears to be moving 4 fleets toward their border with former Drakmori territory. The Hive collectives are consolidating their forces near the trade routes.
And there's something else, we're detecting what appears to be a massive fleet mobilization from beyond the galactic rim."
"Beyond the rim?" Harrison questioned.
"Yes, sir. Long-range sensors are picking up gravitational distortions consistent with large numbers of vessels moving at high sublight speeds. The signals are too distant for detailed analysis, but the scope suggests hundreds of ships."
Admiral Harrison felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders like a collapsing star.
Humanity's intervention had created a power vacuum by neutralizing the Drakmori threat, but nature abhors a vacuum, especially in galactic politics. His contemplation was interrupted by a priority transmission from an unexpected source. The signal was coming from deep space, using communication protocols that didn't match any known alien technology. "Admiral Harrison," the translated voice was crisp and mechanical, "this is Fleet Commander HFY of the Outer Rim Confederacy.
We have been monitoring your recent demonstration against the Drakmori hegemony."
Harrison had never heard of the Outer Rim Confederacy, but the fact that they were monitoring human activities from beyond sensor range suggested technological capabilities that might rival humanity's own.
"Fleet Commander," Harrison replied cautiously, "this is Admiral Harrison of the United Earth Space Command. What is the nature of your interest in our operations? Direct and to the point."
"I appreciate that in a military commander," HFY responded. "The Confederacy has been observing the expansion of aggressive species into this galactic arm for several cycles.
The Drakmori represented a growing threat to regional stability. Your intervention was timely."
The holographic display in the Leviathan's command center updated as new sensor data arrived. The mysterious ships from beyond the rim were now close enough for detailed analysis, and what the sensors revealed made Admiral Harrison's blood run cold.
"Admiral," reported his sensor operator, "I'm reading over 300 vessels approaching at high sublight velocity.
The lead ships are, sir, they're massive.
The largest vessel is showing as over 2 kilometers in length." Fleet Commander HFY's transmission continued as if he could sense Harrison's growing tension. "Do not be alarmed, Admiral. The Confederacy fleet is not here as a threat.
We come to evaluate humanity's potential as a stabilizing force in this region."
"Evaluate?" Harrison asked carefully.
"The Drakmori were merely the latest in a series of expansionist powers that have threatened the smaller civilizations in this galactic arm.
Before them, there were the Void Reapers, the Crimson Hegemony, and others whose names are now forgotten.
The cycle repeats, aggressive species expand, peaceful civilizations suffer, the threat grows until someone with sufficient power intervenes to restore balance."
Admiral Harrison was beginning to understand the larger picture. "And you believe humanity might serve as that balancing force?"
"Your response to a single distress call suggests that your species possesses both the military capability and the moral inclination to protect innocence from aggression.
These are rare qualities in galactic civilization." Back on Earth, the Global Security Council was reaching similar conclusions as they analyzed data from across the galaxy.
The reports painted a picture of a region where dozens of peaceful species lived under constant threat from various aggressive powers, with no effective mechanism for collective defense.
"The pattern is clear," observed Dr. Sarah Kim. the Council's senior xenopolitics analyst. This galactic arm has been trapped in a cycle of conquest and resistance for centuries. Peaceful civilizations develop trade and culture, aggressive powers arise to exploit them, conflict ensues until the aggressive power is eventually defeated or exhausted, then, the cycle begins again. Foreign Minister Kowalski studied the star charts showing the positions of various alien civilizations. And, now they're all looking to us as the potential solution to this cycle?
It appears so, Dr. Kim confirmed. Humanity's technological superiority, combined with our apparent willingness to intervene on behalf of others, has created expectations that we might serve as a galactic peacekeeping force.
President Jackson leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. The question is, are we prepared for that responsibility?
Becoming the galactic police force wasn't exactly in our expansion plans.
Defense Minister Chen pulled up additional data on his tablet.
From a purely military perspective, we have the capability. Our technological advantages are significant, and our industrial capacity could support extended operations across the region. But the political and ethical implications are enormous, completed Secretary General Santos. We'd essentially be imposing human values and human solutions on dozens of alien civilizations. The potential for cultural imperialism is obvious.
Meanwhile, in the Zeltharian system, the situation was becoming increasingly complicated as more alien representatives arrived.
The bridge of the UES Harmony now hosted delegates from 12 different species, each presenting their own perspective on the regional crisis.
Representative Keltar of the Aquatic Consortium addressed the assembled group through the translation system. The Confederacy's arrival confirms what many of us suspected: this incident represents a fundamental shift in galactic power dynamics. Humanity has demonstrated capabilities that exceed anything seen in this region for generations.
Which raises critical questions about their intentions, responded Representative Zindar of the Avian Collective. Military power without clear purpose can be as dangerous as the threats we seek to combat.
Captain Rodriguez found herself in the unusual position of conducting interspecies diplomacy without any formal training or instructions from Earth. Representatives, humanity's intervention was motivated by a simple desire to protect innocent civilians from aggression.
We have no territorial ambitions in this region.
Then, what are your intentions? Asked Representative Morthak of the Silicon Consciousness. Will humanity maintain a military presence to deter future aggression? Will you establish formal alliances with threatened civilizations? Will you participate in existing galactic governance structures?
Rodriguez realized that these were questions far beyond her authority to answer.
Those decisions will be made by our government after careful consideration of all factors.
What I can tell you is that humanity believes in the right of peaceful civilizations to exist without fear of conquest or enslavement. Her words were transmitted across the galaxy within hours, becoming the first official statement of human policy regarding galactic affairs. The reaction was immediate and varied. Some species saw humanity as potential saviors, offering hope for protection against aggressive neighbors.
Others viewed them as a new threat that might eventually turn their overwhelming power toward conquest. Still others wondered whether humanity possessed the wisdom to wield such power responsibly.
Admiral Harrison received updated orders from Earth as the Outer Rim Confederacy fleet settled into position near the human force. The orders were simple in principle but complex in implementation: establish dialogue with all interested parties, gather intelligence on regional threats, and avoid commitments that Earth's government wasn't prepared to honor. Fleet Commander HFY Harrison transmitted to the Confederacy flagship, Earth's government has authorized me to discuss regional security arrangements with interested parties.
Would you be willing to share intelligence regarding other potential threats in this galactic arm? The response came with data packets that made Admiral Harrison's strategic assumptions obsolete overnight.
The Drakmori, it turned out, had been a relatively minor threat compared to other powers operating in the galactic periphery. The Confederacy had identified 7 major aggressive powers, each with the potential to destabilize dozens of star systems. As Admiral Harrison reviewed the intelligence data, he realized that humanity's accidental intervention in the Zeltharian system had been the opening move in a much larger game. The galaxy was watching to see whether Earth would embrace the role of protector that circumstances had thrust upon them, or whether they would retreat to their own space and leave the existing order to collapse. The weight of that decision would soon fall on every human from Earth to the farthest colony, as humanity discovered that some responsibilities cannot be avoided once the universe has decided you're capable of bearing them. 6 months after the incident at Koritha's Edge,
the mining station had been transformed into something unrecognizable. What had once been a simple operation extracting rare minerals from the system's asteroids now served as the unofficial headquarters for the most ambitious peacekeeping initiative in galactic history. Commander Rolf stood on the observation deck of the newly expanded station, watching human construction crews work alongside alien engineers to complete the massive defensive platforms that now protected the system. The sight still amazed him, beings from 17 different species collaborating on a project that would have been impossible just months earlier. "Commander," said his aide, a young Zeltharian named Kextal, "the morning briefing is ready. We have updates from the Outer Rim Confederacy, new intelligence on the Void Reaper movements, and a proposal from the Crystalline Empire regarding joint training exercises." Rolf nodded, though his attention remained fixed on the human vessel UES Resolution, Admiral Harrison's new flagship that had arrived to coordinate the growing peacekeeping operation. The ship was smaller than the massive dreadnoughts that had first appeared in response to the distress call, but its presence represented something far more significant: humanity's long-term commitment to galactic stability. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Earth's government had spent 3 months debating whether to accept the role that circumstances had thrust upon them. The decision had ultimately been made by a combination of practical necessity and moral imperative. With the Drakmori threat neutralized, a power vacuum had emerged that other aggressive species were eager to fill. Without some form of intervention, the region faced the prospect of multiple conflicts that could destabilize dozens of civilizations. Admiral Harrison had grown into his role as humanity's senior galactic representative, though he sometimes missed the simplicity of traditional military operations. Today's challenge was typical of the new reality, mediating a dispute between the avian collective and the aquatic consortium over trade route usage, while simultaneously planning a response to reports of piracy near the Rim territories. "Admiral," reported his aide, Lieutenant Commander Park, "the joint fleet is ready for departure to the Kepler 442 system. 12 human vessels, 8 Confederacy ships, and 5 vessels from the Galactic Council forces." Harrison nodded with satisfaction. The joint operations had become one of humanity's most successful innovations. Rather than acting unilaterally, human forces now operated as part of multinational fleets that gave other species both a voice in peacekeeping operations and valuable experience with advanced military tactics. The mission to Kepler 442 was typical of their current operations. Intelligence reports suggested that pirates using captured Drakmori technology were raiding civilian shipping throughout the system. A purely military response would have been simple, but the peacekeeping mandate required consideration of the pirates' motivations, the local government's capabilities, and the long-term stability of the region. "Admiral," transmitted Fleet Commander Zephi from his own vessel, "our intelligence assets have confirmed that the pirates are primarily refugees from former Drakmori territories. Many lost their worlds when the hegemony collapsed and have turned to raiding out of desperation rather than malice." This was the kind of complexity that traditional military thinking struggled to address. The pirates were genuinely threatening civilian lives and commerce, but they were also victims of the very system that the peacekeepers were trying to protect. "Recommendations?" Harrison asked his staff. "We could offer them settlement opportunities on some of the colony worlds that have requested additional population," suggested Commander Torres. "The Zeltharian government has authorized expansion of their mining operations and needs skilled workers." "And if they refuse?" Harrison asked. "Then, we treat them as hostile forces and respond accordingly," Torres replied. "But we make the offer first." It was this approach, attempting negotiation and assistance before resorting to force, that had earned humanity unexpected respect throughout the galaxy. Other species had begun to see human intervention not as conquest, but as an opportunity for genuine improvement in their circumstances. On Earth, the transformation had been equally dramatic. The revelation that humanity possessed overwhelming military superiority in their galactic region had fundamentally altered human society's relationship with the universe. Earth's economy was booming as alien civilizations sought access to human technology and expertise. The universities were hosting thousands of alien exchange students eager to understand human approaches to science and governance. Dr. Sarah Kim, now serving as Earth's senior advisor on galactic affairs, addressed the latest session of the Global Security Council with news that would have seemed like fantasy just a year earlier. "The preliminary trade agreements are exceeding all projections," she reported. "Alien governments are particularly interested in our medical technology, manufacturing processes, and what they call our conflict resolution methodologies. In exchange, we're gaining access to scientific knowledge that could advance human civilization by centuries.
The economic benefits were obvious, but Dr. Kim's next announcement addressed the more profound implications of humanity's new role. More significantly, we're seeing the emergence of what could be called a galactic peace dividend. 7 star systems have reported their first year without major conflicts in over a century. Trade volumes between previously hostile species have increased by over 300%. And we've received formal requests from 43 civilizations to join what they're calling the Terran Peace Initiative.
President Jackson leaned forward with interest. 43 civilizations?
Yes, sir. They're proposing a formal alliance structure with Earth as the guarantor of collective security. In exchange for human protection against aggressive powers, member civilizations would contribute resources, intelligence, and specialized capabilities to the peacekeeping effort.
The proposal represented the formalization of what had been developing organically since the Zeltharian incident.
Humanity had accidentally become the center of a galactic alliance dedicated to protecting peaceful civilizations from conquest and exploitation. Defense Minister Chen highlighted the military implications on his display. From a strategic perspective, this would give us early warning of threats throughout the region and access to bases and resources that would make our peacekeeping operations significantly more effective. But it would also make us formally responsible for the security of billions of alien civilians, which we're already informally responsible for anyway, observed Foreign Minister Kowalski. The difference is that a formal alliance would give us legal frameworks for intervention and clearer mandates for action. Meanwhile, in the depths of space beyond the galactic rim, a very different conversation was taking place aboard the massive vessel Extinction's Edge. War Hierarch Vashtar of the Entropy Cult reviewed the intelligence reports with growing excitement as he planned the next phase of his species' expansion into the galaxy proper. The humans have eliminated the Drakmori and established themselves as the dominant military force in the region, reported his intelligence chief. Their technology appears to be significantly advanced, but their operational patterns suggest they are primarily defensive in nature.
Vashtar's cybernetic implants glowed with anticipation.
The Entropy Cult had been building their strength beyond the galactic rim for generations, waiting for the right moment to launch their campaign of conquest.
The elimination of the Drakmori by these humans had actually simplified their strategic planning. How many worlds have fallen under human protection, he asked. Current estimates suggest over 200 star systems are now part of their informal sphere of influence.
Population estimates range from 50 to 80 billion sentient beings. Vashtar's mandibles clicked with satisfaction.
Excellent. When we defeat the humans and claim their territory, we will acquire the largest concentration of slave populations in galactic history.
The Entropy Cult had made a fundamental miscalculation about human nature. They assumed that humanity's peacekeeping efforts represented the limits of human military capability, rather than humanity's preferred method of applying their overwhelming technological advantages. This miscalculation would become apparent 3 weeks later when Entropy Cult scout ships were detected approaching the outer systems of the Terran Peace Initiative's territory.
Admiral Harrison received the initial reports while conducting a diplomatic mission in the Crystalline Empire's capital system. The news transformed the routine visit into an emergency strategic conference.
Admiral, reported Fleet Commander Zeph via long-range communication, our deep space monitors have detected approximately 60 vessels of unknown configuration approaching from beyond the galactic rim.
Their technology signatures suggest capabilities that may exceed even human standards.
Harrison felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders.
Estimated time until they reach inhabited systems? Approximately 6 standard days to the outer colonies.
Sir, based on their approach vector and formation patterns, this appears to be a military operation rather than an exploration mission.
The next 6 days would test everything humanity and their allies had built since the Zeltharian incident.
But, as Admiral Harrison began issuing orders for the largest military mobilization in human history, he felt confident in humanity's response. Earth's answer came not in the form of 200 ships, but in the deployment of over 800 vessels supported by alien allies from across the region. The message was clear: the galaxy now had protectors who possessed both the capability and the determination to defend the peaceful against the predatory. War Hierarch Vashtar received his first indication that he had miscalculated when his scouts reported the approaching defensive fleet. Where he had expected perhaps 50 ships, his sensors registered nearly 1,000 vessels representing dozens of different species, all moving in perfect coordination toward an intercept course.
How many ships did you say? He demanded.
937 confirmed contacts, his sensor operator reported with obvious shock. Sir, the lead vessels are transmitting a message. The transmission was simple and direct. Unknown vessels, you are approaching territory under the protection of the Terran Peace Initiative. State your intentions immediately or reverse course. For the first time in his life, War Hierarch Vashtar felt something approaching fear. The Entropy cult had built their plans around conquering a region defended by a single species with advanced technology. Instead, they faced a unified alliance that had turned humanity's technological advantages into the foundation for the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. As the two fleets approached each other in the darkness between stars, the galaxy held its collective breath. The outcome would determine whether the peaceful civilizations that had flourished under human protection would continue to thrive, or whether a new dark age of conquest and slavery would begin. But Admiral Harrison had learned the lessons of the Zeltharian incident well. This time, humanity wasn't responding alone. They were leading a coalition of species who had chosen cooperation over conquest, peace over predation, and hope over fear. The Entropy cult would discover what the Drakmori had learned 6 months earlier, that threatening innocence in this galaxy meant facing not just human determination, but the combined will of civilizations who had learned that together, they were stronger than the sum of their individual parts. As the defensive fleet took its positions, Admiral Harrison reflected on the remarkable transformation that had begun with a simple distress call from a mining station. Humanity had stumbled into the role of galactic protector, but they had embraced that role with characteristic determination and ingenuity. The galaxy would never be the same. And, as the latest threat approached, it was clear that the universe was a better, safer place because sometimes, when someone calls for help, an entire armada shows up,